I've always wanted to hold a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe speedrunning record. Being at the top of the leaderboard by completing a part of the game faster than anyone else would be so incredibly cool, but unfortunately, this just isn't realistic. Anyone high up on these leaderboards has been playing this game for years and is probably one of the game's top players. I mean, I'm fairly good at Mario Kart 8, but compared to runners like this, I have no chance. But maybe I don't need to be better. You see, when the Switch 2 came out, the increased speed of the console relative to the original meant that loading times in between the courses were significantly reduced. To avoid making all of the previous records irrelevant, the speedrun.com moderators created a completely different set of leaderboards for the Switch 2. But the thing is, all of the top players who have a Switch 2 have spent their time speedrunning Mario Kart World instead, which means that this leaderboard has been left almost completely vacant. Most speedruns only have a couple runs submitted to them, and the ones that have more don't even get as low as the records from the Switch 1, which means that I could get the world record time quite a bit easier than usual. But as I was looking into this, I had a thought. What if, instead of just getting the record in one speedrun, I did it in all of them? Now, this might seem like an absurd goal at first, but when you look at it further, it actually seems fairly achievable. There are 4 different versions of the leaderboards, but I decided to focus on the one with the fastest possible runs, 200cc, no items. Inside of this, there are 34 different speedrun categories on the leaderboards. The longest one is a full game run, 96 tracks, and nearly all of the rest are subsections of this longer run, being divided first into 2 48-track runs, then 6 16-track runs, and then finally into the 24 different cups. And then there's one last 32-track run that covers the entirety of the original base game from the Wii U edition of Mario Kart 8. And luckily, you don't have to do every run individually. The exact rules are a bit too complicated to go over here, but essentially, if you do a longer run that contains any of these speedruns, you can do the longer one and have it count for both categories. Now the only question is where to start. I decided that it would be best to go for the 96 tracks record first, so that I could hopefully fill in most of the lower speedruns at the same time. So I began my first ever Mario Kart 8 Deluxe speedrun. Throughout it, I constantly made mistakes. There were multiple times when I straight up fell off the map, and many more where I went over off-road and straight into walls. Regardless, I eventually finished it with a time of 3 hours and 6 minutes. This was only 5 minutes off from the current record, so it seemed that if I could just redo the run and fix these few things, I might be able to get the record immediately. So I did another attempt. And 3 hours later, I had a run only a minute and a half faster than the previous one. Simply doing more attempts wasn't going to work. I needed to practice and fix the places where I was going wrong. Luckily, most of my time loss was concentrated in a few select courses that I played particularly poorly, so I gathered a list of the worst offenders and got to work on improving my skills on them. The first one that I decided to look at was Hyrule Circuit, specifically the shortcut at the end of the course. I'm fairly good at this on 150cc, so I expected that my skills would be somewhat transferable, but this didn't seem to be the case. The difficulty with the shortcut on 150 is getting enough height to spend as little time as possible in the off-road, but on 200, it's almost the opposite. You can get enough height perfectly fine, the issue now is controlling your speed. I kept flying straight into the wall, and even when I did get a decent cut, I often had terrible alignment headed into the next section. Every once in a while, I did get an alright attempt, but doing this consistently seemed nearly impossible. But after a while, I finally figured out what I was doing wrong. In the section beforehand, I had always gone to the left, but it turns out that heading around the right side gives you a much better alignment and makes the setup for the trick way easier. I started getting way more consistent with it, and after about an hour, felt confident enough to move on to Yoshi Circuit. The major time loss on this course was again a shortcut. The gap underneath the waterfall is deceptively large, and even though the grass beforehand is slanted up into a ramp, you barely get any height from this, so you need to be going fairly quick and have a mini turbo to make it over. My main issue was that after coming around the turn immediately before the shortcut, I barely had enough space to drift unless I intentionally slowed down. But if I did this, I had next to no speed heading into the grass. I kept attempting different ways of approaching this, but nothing was working until I tried something a bit strange. Cutting off the grass here. This seemed like it would be counterproductive and give me less space to work with, but I actually found that because I was further to the left than normal, I was able to drift tighter and charge the boost faster. It still took me a while to get it consistently, because even with everything done correctly, the shortcut is still incredibly precise. But I did eventually get the hang of it and moved on to Bone Dry Dunes. This track was honestly the one that gave me the most most trouble during my previous record attempt. It's just so incredibly bumpy and inconsistent in this part that I had no idea how to properly drive it, much less collect any of the coins. Luckily, it didn't take me long to figure out what I was doing wrong. Instead of trying to do multiple short drifts, I just needed to hold one for the entire length of this turn. This made it a bit more controllable, but after hours of trying, I was still having runs where I slid off the track into the off-road. Eventually, I decided that I wasn't going to perfect it every time, and I just had to hope for a good run when it counted. Toad Harbor isn't a super difficult course, but there were a few things that I needed to keep in mind. Firstly, the boost panel shortcut is different on 200cc because you go way too far to complete it in two parts like normal. Instead, you have to hop onto the end of the trick ramp and jump over the entire gap in one go. This isn't super difficult when you have 10 coins, but on the first lap, you have none at this point, meaning it's way harder to get far enough. I tried practicing this, but considering how inconsistent it was and how little time it saves, I decided to skip it on lap 1. A bit further into the course, we encounter the split in the road that leads up to the shortcut. Taking the top path is a lot faster, but also quite a bit more difficult, because when you get launched into the air by the boost panel, it's impossible to quickly change directions to avoid this wall. The solution to this is hopping onto the ramp so that you get launched to the side. This doesn't seem too bad, but with the way that the road before it is angled, it's really easy to go flying off here. Next after this, you have to grab 2 of the coins moving behind the tram before cutting around to the inside to take the corner sharply. This is honestly pretty easy, especially after getting used to the course, but every once in a while I would be just a little bit too close and barely bump into it. I time trialed a few other tracks after that, making sure that I was used to them and could reliably get decent times, but after a couple days of this, I finally felt ready to take on the 96 tracks run again. But before we get to that, I need to tell you about another speedrunning challenge that you can participate in with today's sponsor, Disney Speedstorm. Disney Speedstorm is an action racing game from Gameloft that brings together iconic characters and worlds from across the Disney and Pixar universes. There's a lot of variety in this game with 20 plus maps and over 100 different Disney and Pixar characters, each with their own unique skills and specialties. The gameplay and mechanics also offer plenty of depth and reward skillful play. Take for example, drifting, which allows you to charge up the boost meter, giving you enough speed to cut off parts of the track if you time it right. But if you're out of boost and need to take a shortcut, you still can thanks to my favorite mechanic, the jump. This gigantic leap can be incredibly versatile, allowing you to skip large portions of the track or improvise lines in the middle of the race. But what about that speedrunning challenge I mentioned earlier? Well, Disney Speedstorm just released their brand new Zootopia update right on time to celebrate the release of Zootopia 2, which includes new characters and a brand new course to play on. But the part that interested me the most was the fact that they're partnering with speedrun.com to host an in-game speedrunning event that starts the day this video releases. And this is where you come in. I want to try and see how many people from my community we can get onto the top 100 leaderboard, so here's the plan. Join the game and add JS before your name to identify yourself. Don't worry, you can change it back after a week. And try to get as high on the leaderboard as possible. In order to participate and play Disney Speedstorm for free, click my link in the pinned comment to play on any of these platforms and use the code on screen to get a bunch of goodies to use in-game. Thanks again to Gameloft for sponsoring this video, and now, back to speedrunning. I got set up, started the timer, and began the first race. Initially, it was going pretty poorly. I was a couple seconds behind my previous run entering Sweet Sweet Canyon, but right around here, I began to hit my stride. I immediately made up the time and then entered Toad Harbor 9 seconds ahead and with 3 gold splits in a row. For those of you not super familiar with speedrunning, a split is gold when you do a part of the run faster than ever before, meaning for all 3 of these tracks, this was my best time in a speedrun yet. I decided to avoid the trolley on lap 1, so I had slightly less coins for the beginning of 2, but I still nailed all the important parts, meaning after crossing the line, I was 18 seconds ahead of the old run, beating my previous Toad Harbor by 10 seconds. And this trend continued. I had a constant flood of gold splits, cutting down my time quickly. And after a decent bone-dry dunes, I was 37 seconds ahead. At SNES Donut Plains 3, the speedrun timer broke completely. This was because on the previous record attempt, I had had multiple issues with it that caused some splits not to count. So I was flying almost completely blind until the end of the run, with no idea whether I was actually gaining enough time or not. But I knew I had to be doing better because I just felt so much faster. My constant time trialing of these courses hadn't just improved my skills on them, but on 200cc in general. So as I continued to speed through these courses, I held out hope that in the end, my time would be the lower one. But as I entered Wee Rainbow Road with 3 minutes left, I knew I had it. and 3 laps later, I flew over the finish line with a final time of 2:59.59, over a minute ahead of the previous record. But hang on, how many other runs did I beat in the process? 2? 3? Well, no. I beat 6 out of the 9 possible records. This was huge. All that stood in the way of holding every world record in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was 3 speedruns and the rest of the cups. And for both of these records, my time was within 3 seconds. So I figured that with a little bit of time trialing, I had these in the bag. For the Waves 5 and 6 speedrun, I worked on my 2 worst tracks for about an hour, after which I did the run and obliterated my old time by over 30 seconds. The 48 tracks run was a pretty similar story. I slowly gained time over the course of the run, and despite a few bad segments, was over 30 seconds ahead when I crossed the finish line on Big Blue. So there was just one major speedrun left. Finish this, knock out the cups, and bam, done. Right? Well, not exactly. It turns out that this run is better than all the others. Like, way better. The 28:54 time was a minute and a half off my personal best, and the player who set it was second place on the Switch leaderboards. But that doesn't mean it's unbeatable. In fact, it was never meant to be a Nitro Courses run in the first place. They had originally been going for the Mushroom Cup record and just happened to finish the other 12 tracks afterward. So even though the record came from a top player, it wasn't nearly as optimized as it could have been. So I still had hope that I could take it down. The Mushroom Cup segment inside that run had also been submitted as its own standalone record, so I decided to follow the same strategy. Beat both records at once. First, I mastered the remaining courses in the full run, then I'd grind out Mushroom Cup attempts until I got it all together in one. Then, since none of the rest of the cups have any records on them yet, it would be trivial to finish them off. A couple days of practicing later, I finished with the 12 other courses and made it to the Mushroom Cup. The first course of these, Mario Kart Stadium, has 3 different shroomless shortcuts. First, when you go between the pipe and the wall, then over the grass before the ramp, and then immediately afterwards across this patch of off-road. These are all fairly difficult to pull off quickly, and trying to get each of them 3 times during a run was incredibly difficult. I would also mess up getting coins from this group during the gliding section. You have to angle your kart in a very specific way to make sure that you can get 3 instead of the typical 2, but because there are basically no visual cues for where you need to go, this can be really easy to mess up. Water Park is the next course, and while it's not nearly as difficult as Mario Kart Stadium, there are still some pretty precise parts to it. At the entrance to the building, you have to enter it at a very specific angle, because if you're even a little bit off, you'll go flying into the air, which slows you down a ton. Then, a bit later down the track, you have to drift to the right in midair and charge a purple mini turbo. The timing for this is actually pretty difficult to get down because if you land too early, the boost won't be fully charged, but if you land too late, you waste valuable time. Sweet Sweet Canyon is another frustrating course. On lap 1, you have to take the right path in this section, but on laps 2 and 3, you have to take the left one and jump off of its ramp and over the off-road. This is way harder than it looks, because when you commit to the drift beforehand, you can't see the road ahead of you. This caused so many problems for me, and even when I started to figure it out, I would have attempts where I just went straight into the invisible wall to the left of it. Finally, Thwomp Ruins. I actually had quite a bit of experience on this course in 200cc, so for the most part, I just had to adjust a few tricks and practice it a bit more. But I did try to incorporate one new thing, Genzua Glider. You see, when you hit a ramp while turning sharply in a glider, it will launch you off incredibly quickly, saving a decent amount of time. This can be fairly inconsistent, but if you mess it up, you can usually just glide back to the track, so I decided that it was worth going for. So with all the strats I needed, I began attempts at the record. It started off slow. Most of my runs would end on Mario Kart Stadium due to the numerous shortcuts, and the ones that made it past usually didn't make it farther after that. But every once in a while, one would slip through. After an excellent Mushroom Cups run of 6:37, I just kept having incredible races. I got a gold split on Shy Guy Falls, and then 3 more leading up to Rainbow Road, before crossing the finish line with a 29:37. This was a massive improvement, but I was still a good bit off from the Nitro Courses record. But for the Mushroom Cup record, I was doing a lot better. After a run with 3 gold splits in a row, I was left with a time of 6:34, just 3 seconds away. And then, only about 50 attempts later, I got onto another incredible Mushroom Cups run. Mario Kart Stadium passed without incident, and after finishing Water Park at just under 3 minutes, I knew this one was going to be special. Both of my shortcuts on Sweet Sweet Canyon were fairly quick, and after hitting the Genzua glider on 2 out of the 3 laps on Thwomp Ruins, I crossed the line at 6 minutes and 32 seconds. 1 second away. Even the smallest improvement could have made up the difference, so after losing the Nitro Courses run a bit later, I got back to attempting immediately. Hundreds of tries later, I broke my own PB for the Nitro Courses run with a 29:33. I had messed up quite a few times on this one, so there was definitely room for improvement, but unfortunately, this would never happen. Because as I went back to recheck the time, I noticed 30 notifications from speedrun.com. Pianist15, the top runner who had set the Nitro Courses record, had come back and submitted times on every single one of the major speedruns, meaning all of my records were relegated to second place with no chance of coming back. Right at the finish line, my hopes of having a world record in every speedrun were completely demolished. My time was up. I finished out my catalog of speedruns by completing the rest of the cups and submitted them to the leaderboards. This wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I'm still incredibly proud of the records I set, especially my 632 mushroom cups, which would be about 35th on the normal Switch leaderboards if you ignore loading times. If you enjoyed watching me attempt these and want to see more speedrunning content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And thank you for watching.